Hi, Dustin. Welcome back to the podcast.
I love the GRC Me podcast and always one of my favorites to listen to. So it's definitely an honor to be on with you.
Oh, well, I love it. And I am excited for our conversation today because I think it's something that a lot of our listeners will find value in and resonate with them because we're going to talk all about the benefits of a holistic GRC program and a platform. So, for those that are less familiar with GRC, it's risk governance, risk and compliance. And so, we're going to talk about what a holistic GRC experience will look like. So, Dustin, that's my first question to you for their conversation today is just tell us, what should a holistic GRC experience be?
Yeah, so holistic GRC for me, Megan, first and foremost, it's got to be about connecting disparate data points, right? So holistic GRC often it really requires inputs from across different pieces of a cybersecurity program. So that's got to be the first part is the ability to be able to connect the dots across those disparate data points and bring them all together and aggregate them.
Mm-hmm.
I think second to that is that holistic GRC and cybersecurity in general, for that matter, can get quite complex, right? So the ability to have ease in flexing with the business as the requirements change, where the data is coming from changes, in any sort of adaptation to unique requirements of an organization, all need to be sort of factored into holistic GRC rather, and that experience that organizations are going through, right? You've got to be able to flex and adapt and change as the organization changes and different dynamics change. And then I
Mm-hmm.
think thirdly to that is having the ease to automate different tasks and responsibilities. So as you connect those disparate data points and you're trying to get teams to work with one another that traditionally may not have worked well together or found it difficult to work across sort of organizational silos, the ability to automate some of those tasks and responsibilities can allow organizations to do more with less
Mm-hmm.
and to counteract some of those effects of staffing shortages and the ability to find qualified individuals, especially in the cybersecurity space. So I think having that holistic GRC capability to be able to automate some tasks and responsibility is really a third key component to that.
And you just, I know we've talked about this too, Dustin, in the past. You just touched on it really well in that third point about just benefits. It's saving time, it's creating efficiencies, it's having teams working together in a centralized place. But it's, saving FTE resources when, it's a very tough labor market out there. And I think everyone's looking for really great security folks. And so anywhere where we can ease the burden off of our current security folks or risk folks or compliance folks of these manual tasks, better, because we need their talents applied to doing the important work, right? Of like mitigating the risks or taking strategic risks and things like that. So I know, nudging their peers or colleagues or stakeholders is not a great use of their time. And I know we've talked about the labor market's tight out there. And so how do we, I think that a couple ways of helping organizations be more efficient in this time is to just look for those redundancies of work and inefficiencies of work and help them use their time to the best that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely key because, yeah, it's become so difficult to keep up with how quickly security needs change, how quickly the threat landscape is changing, and all of this sort of thing. So anything that you can get to where you can bring more efficiency and more effectiveness to the picture for an organization,
Mhm.
it just goes so far in helping them try and keep up with the fast pace
Mhm.
of cybersecurity. It's gotten to that point where it's critical that they get those efficiencies.
Mhm. And I know with your experience with Logigate and your experience with the Risk Cloud, and just helping clients adopt a holistic approach, do you have some examples or stories that you could share with us about, what were the business outcomes that folks were hoping to achieve within a holistic GRC? I mean, I know off the top of my head, some of the what we call business outcomes that they're hoping to do is, one is quicker, more informed decision making and better visibility into the program so we can take proactive risks. Unpack that for us a little bit. What are you hearing as far as outcomes like that, like visibility and then just speed to insights for decision making?
Yeah, those are really great points and questions that you're bringing out, Megan. And I think the key here is, you know, a lot of traditional GRC platforms that exist out there have been able to provide visibility. But I think the biggest drawback and some of the constraints that that place on organizations is, even though they were providing visibility, it was siloed visibility, right? So what
Mm-hmm.
I mean by that, to a certain extent, is, you know, GRC platforms would offer things like privacy capabilities in providing visibility into privacy concerns, and they would provide vulnerability management modules, and they would provide audit modules and risk management modules, all of these disparate modules, but they were all siloed. So yeah, you could get visibility into each one of those individual areas, but they were constrained from being able to bring all of those, that siloed visibility together
Mm-hmm.
to create that holistic picture. And that's why I think so many organizations have struggled. And it's a key business outcome that so many different businesses are looking for. So once they're able to connect the dots across that siloed visibility, bring all of those different connection points together, they can react quicker to dynamic changes that are happening across the threat landscape. They
Mm-hmm.
can start to do things that are more complex and have been difficult to overcome in the past, like being able to quantify risk. Part of the reason why organizations have struggled in quantifying cyber risk, I think, in the past, is because they had only that siloed visibility available and
Mm-hmm.
no way of bringing all of those different connection points together,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually fundamental to your ability to quantify risk. You have to connect those disparate data points if
Mm-hmm.
you want to have any success with that. So I think all of those things are definitely business outcomes that organizations are looking for with that
Mm-hmm.
holistic approach, is being able to bring together that siloed visibility and
Mm-hmm.
create more holistic visibility.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really glad you just mentioned that concept of risk quantification. I mean, it's been topical for us here at Logicate. We've been talking more about it. The market seems to want to mature and go in that space just to have a common language of risk within an organization and how to quantify the financial impact of risk. You can only do it with a flexible data model, flexible GRC, whereby they're not different, independent modules, that clearly they are linked together. There's shared data and information there. And they were saying, I believe from my colleagues, they were saying they really want to measure this business outcome by tracking risk reduction by dollars spent. So really being able to distill it down to the economic impact or the financial impact of the organization. And he just like, that sounds amazing. You just can't do that today if you're living in silos. So yeah, thank you for that. Anything to add from any other stories before we kind of move on here, but anything else that I think would be interesting to share with the audience about holistic GRC?
Yeah, I mean, one of the customers, another customer that I had worked with was actually a large insurance carrier. And one of the things that they were having difficulty in doing was getting a seat at the table with the
Mhm.
enterprise risk committee that existed within the organization. But by being able to connect these disparate data points across threat intelligence and vulnerability management, and taking into account asset awareness, right?
Mm,
What are the most critical assets in your organization? What is the valuation of those assets? And what's the financial impact if something bad were to happen to those
mhm,
assets? And being able to tie it back to those threats and vulnerabilities, we were able to build an interconnected and interwoven program for them that was able to bring all of that holistic information together. And the outcome of that was they did it in such a well thought out way that they ended up getting a seat at the enterprise risk committee table because they were able to finally start quantifying things in financial terms
Mm-hmm.
and being able to compare the risks in cyber alongside with other areas of business risk. And they did it in such a great way that the Enterprise Risk Committee said, look, I think we could use some pointers from the cyber team on how to better quantify business risk in other areas of the business and adapt some of your approaches to this manner. So, I think organizations who are able to piece these things to get together can
Mm-hmm.
help elevate themselves within their own organization, even in addition to all the other benefits that can come with it.
Well, thank you for sharing that story because that resonates with me, and I can see how I love that. Like how can you elevate yourselves, elevate the conversation, have cross-functional dialogue about that, kind of sharing across departments about what are you doing that works for you? How can we use this across the organization? I know that's something when we think about future initiatives with things like ESG. I mean, that's a topic that's completely cross-functional, and it will require folks to come to the table and think about this across the organization. And so it's this kind of holistic GRC, which is a great stepping stone to really make sure initiatives like ESG initiatives and things like that are handled and addressed really efficiently and with great support across the organization. So thank you for speaking to that. And so tell us a little bit in your experience and your guidance, what should folks be looking for, or what's going to give them the full effect of a holistic GRC platform?
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these things, we've touched on throughout this conversation, I think, Megan. But first and foremost, you have to have a platform that is going to allow you to be flexible and
Okay.
adaptable, right? So a lot of organizations have failed in creating holistic GRC capabilities in the past because they were so constrained by their GRC
Mm,
platforms that forced them into siloed visibility models, like we were talking about, and forced them to change how they were operating their programs within each of those silos to how the platform itself was structured. Clearly, that sort of approach doesn't really work very well, and that's why so many organizations have struggled. You need a platform that can adapt to the organization's requirements rather than the other way around, and trying to fit a square peg into a round hole with that platform. I think secondly, even some of those platforms that allowed some of that flexibility in the past, it required extensive programming or development in order to make them adaptable.
mhm,
So it would take them months, or in some cases, I saw even years to to build in and to develop that platform to the unique requirements of the organization. Well, if it takes you months or years, you're going to be behind the eight ball even more so than what you probably already were, right? The threat landscaping is changing on a daily basis.
mm,
You need to be able to adapt quickly and on the
mhm,
fly without having to bring on developers that take months or years to reprogram every
mhm,
time you require a change in process.
mhm,
And then finally, being able to leverage all of the interconnected data points to be able to do things like quantifying cyber risk, you have to be able to create that holistic visibility instead of siloed visibility.
mhm,
So you can't achieve cyber risk quantification probably very easily, if at all, if you're
mhm,
not able to interconnect and get that holistic picture. You have to have that in there, and you've
mhm,
got to be able to adapt and flex to some of those fundamental data points, like
mhm,
what are the key threats and risks, or three key threats that your organization is facing, both threat actors and threat tactics and techniques. How do those relate to vulnerabilities within your organization? And then being able to have asset awareness about what those threats and vulnerabilities, how they relate to critical assets in the organization and the financial impact if you don't take care of key vulnerabilities that exist out there.
mhm. Well, thank you for that. And I love the visual you said of, having a technology that's flexible enough to kind of wrap around what is going well or what you've defined that's working well in the business. I think of this as like technology wrapping their arms around a business or process. And it reigns so true to me because I think when we think about holistic GRC, there are, this is cross-functional endeavor and there's a lot of moving parts and there are things going well within the listeners' organizations that we want to maintain. And so how do you keep those good processes? Just put a workflow automation behind it, and not have to recreate everything. And that's what I'm hearing more and more. People want to keep the good and update the not so good and see areas for improvement, right? And have some kind of best in class guidance about how to update the not so good. So wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And so you are a resident SME and expert here in all things holistic GRC, but what else are you working on, Dustin, recently?
Well, at Kivu, we work pretty extensively on ransomware cases. Actually, we have a lot of people in our organization that help organizations respond to ransomware incidents, help them negotiate with the ransomware actors, and all of those sort of things. And one of the things that my team gets involved in is helping organizations either pre or post breach figure out how do they better prepare their incident response capabilities to some of the unique attributes of ransomware in particular, and bringing into account things like pay or no pay decisions, right? Which in the past, a lot of cyber incidents could be largely managed by mostly technical teams. The unique nature of ransomware is that executive teams and sometimes even boards of directors now need to get involved because of those pay no pay decisions, which can often reach into the millions of dollars. So there are a lot of organizations I'm finding are woefully unprepared for those unique attributes, and being able to adapt and flex to having their processes account for not only the technical aspects, but how do you get that information into the hands of executives quickly as they start to try and make some of those pay or no pay decisions. And
Mhm.
that's where, circling back to some of these holistic GRC platforms and unique attributes that a platform has to have, that's where I think some of the magic can start to happen in a really practical way, right?
Mhm.
How do you adapt incident response plans and playbooks that can often extend? I've seen playbooks for incident response that are hundreds of pages literally in length. Well, how do you react to the
Yeah.
fast moving nature of a ransomware attack when people's roles and responsibilities are spread across hundreds of pages of documentation? You can't.
Right. Right. Right.
Being able to automate that with a platform automation and workflow automation, connect disparate data points to be able to collect the technical and tactical information you need and get that quickly into the hands of executives, I think would go a long way to helping organizations better respond and react when they do ultimately face a ransomware attack. And so
Mhm.
that's something that I'm trying to get across to organizations, and being able to make recommendations to them about platforms like the Risk Cloud that I think can greatly help them overcome some of those constraints that they faced in the past.
Well, awesome. That's important and exciting work. And I know we've all been thinking about, yeah, how do you react quickly? How do you respond quickly? And also, how do you get to the insights that you need quickly? So, thank you so much, Justin, for sharing your thoughts with us today on all things holistic GRC and what you've been up to lately. Thanks again for joining us. This is Megan Fee with GRC and Me.